Right, I'm looking at the list now to make sure we have. I think they're actually in their channels. And actually, I do apologize. We are having a little bit of audio difficulty in the chamber. While we can hear you through the staff computer. It's not coming through the audio. I think we will have this squared away in just a moment. If you all just bear with us for a moment. Assistant City Clerk, could you do some talking on your end just so we can take 2 moments to troubleshoot this real quick? Well, so it's still just through the laptop. Yes, we have Commissioner Parks in chambers. My apologies, everyone online. We are troubleshooting the audio problem in the chambers. Not quite sure what setting has changed. Everything appears to be as it should. And Brianna, can you do one more test? Talk into your microphone. No, we are not getting that audio in the chambers. We're getting Vance on the line.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we have solved that audio problem. Thank you, Vance Vers. We appreciate the assistance there. It is now 5:42, and I believe we can get this meeting started.
Thank you. I now call this meeting of the Parks, Recreation, and Arts Commission to order. Would the Secretary Clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Parks.
Here.
Commissioner Barraza. I don't see Commissioner Barraza on. Commissioner Singh.
Here.
Commissioner Cummings.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Apuda.
Here.
Commissioner Vang will be absent today. Vice Chair Dolan.
Present.
And Chair McCoy.
Present. We will now begin the Pledge of Allegiance. Will everyone please stand? Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. We will start with approval of the agenda. Secretary, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda. I would like to announce that we do have Spanish, Hmong, and Punjabi interpreters through Zoom.
Thank you. Are there any other proposed changes to the agenda? No? All right, I will move on. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dolan. Is there a second?
Cummings will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Cummings. Secretary, please conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yep.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Apuda?
Yes.
Vice Chair Dolan?
Yes.
And Chair McCoy?
Yes.
All
All
pass.
right, we're going to go on to approval of minutes of December 20th, 2021 meetings. Minutes, are there any changes to the minutes? December 20th, 2021?
The clerk's office has not been made aware of any changes.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Cummings will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Cummings. Is there a second?
Commissioner Parks will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Parks. Secretary, can you please conduct a roll call vote?
Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yep.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Apuda?
Yes.
Vice Chair Dolan?
Yes.
And Chair McCoy?
Yes. Thank you, City Clerk. We will now move on to subcommittee reports. This item is a discussion item for the commission and no public comments will be taken related to this item. Does the Cultural Arts Plan Subcommittee have an update it would like to provide to the commission?
Chair McCoy, this is Commissioner Parks. I'll just mention as a reminder that we extended the deadline for the Cultural Arts Plan Consultant RFP. So the deadline for folks to submit proposals is February 7th. And I would just encourage my fellow commissioners to forward that opportunity out through your network so we can make sure that we get some additional proposals in the door. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the Highest Needs Neighborhood Subcommittees have an update it would like to provide to this commission? No updates from the Highest Needs Neighborhood Subcommittee at this time. Dr. Apuda or Commissioner Singh, do you guys have any updates you would like to share since you guys serve on this committee?
No, Madam Chair.
No updates from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the Parks Master Plan Subcommittee have an update it would like to provide to this commission?
This is Commissioner Cummings, and I have just a brief update. So no specific.
Commissioner Cummings.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes. So there's no specific update other than
¿Hay una
the.
autorización específica?
other
It
than
seems,
I
Yeah.
apologize.
I'm
That's our
sorry.
Spanish interpreter.
It seems like our Spanish interpreter is on the
Main.
main channel. So can we please place Pedro in the Spanish channel?
Yes, actually, Chair McCoy, this is Brian. I have been, Pedro, trying to place you in the channel, but it is not accepting your email address. So
Oh.
perhaps you can try a different one and log back on.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Commissioner Cummings,
No,
you can
Luis, you go.
proceed.
Luis, you go ahead. Luis, you go ahead.
What a way to start our first meeting off for the year. Yay.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Commissioner Cummings.
Yes. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll do that.
oh,
Can we mute Pedro,
Yes,
please, so we can move on?
Working
Thank
on
you.
that right now.
Okay, Commissioner Cummings, try again, please.
yes, thank you. So there's no specific update other than the WRT is engaged regarding the update and will continue to communicate with the subcommittee with us as well as the commission at large regarding timing, et cetera. There are a couple of deadlines that we have to meet as a commission, including the FY23 budget recommendations from the commission, which is obviously quickly approaching, but the PMP amendment is in the queue and on the to-do list and will be coming forward in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to member reports and comments. As a reminder, this is a time for commission members to report anything they feel important for the public or commission to know, but it's not a time for discussion. Commissioner Cummings, do you have any reports or comments you would like to make?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller, any reports or comments?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dolan, any reports or comments?
Just a cheery Happy New Year to my fellow commissioners and to everyone on this call.
Thank you. Commissioner Singh, any report or comments?
No report or comments here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Apuda, any reports or comments?
Madam Chair, I just echo Vice Chair Dolan's wishes for a happy and wonderful New Year for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Parks, any reports or comments?
No, not at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. No reports or comments from me, so we can move on. Just a happy new year to everyone. It's good to see everyone tonight. We will now move on to city administration and park staff reports and comments. Does anyone from the administration have any reports or comments for the commission?
Well, good evening. This is Francine Kane, Assistant City Manager. And I just had one item I wanted to kind of bring up to be on your radar in the spring months. Last year, we at the Parks Department had offered tours of the water features of the parks for the commissioners if they wanted to kind of tour the city to see what parks had water features. We're thinking of starting those tours up again to visit parks that the commissioners might have interest in looking at and reviewing. So we'll be discussing that a little later in the spring. And that's all I have. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you. Does anyone from the park staff have any reports or comments for the commission?
We do not. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to unscheduled and scheduled communication. Would any member of the public like to speak on any issue within the jurisdiction of this commission? You have 3 minutes.
If you are a member of the public on Zoom and you'd like to speak, please raise your digital hand now. If you're a member of the public and would like to speak, please raise your hand. We have no speakers on Zoom. Is there anyone in the chambers who would like to speak at this time? Nope, we're good to go. No public comment.
Thank you. We will now move on to hearings. Our first hearing is item number 22-89, hearing to receive public input allocations related to Measure P and the annual Parks Department budget and capital improvement plans. Would any member of the public like to make a comment regarding allocations related to Measure P or the Parks Department budget for fiscal year 2022-2023? You will have up to 3 minutes for a comment.
Any member of the public would like to comment on this item? Please raise your digital hand. This is hearing to receive public input allocations related to Measure P and annual Parks Department budget and capital improvement plans.
I see 2 hands up.
All right, our first speaker is Miss Tejas. And This computer today is... Brianna, can you... Ms. Tejas, can you unmute yourself? All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Mr. Tejas.
I'm sorry. Is this including people who are supposed to be talking about their organizations and so on for the P measure?
Yes, and Chair McCoy, this is the item where we were allowing 5 minutes to speak per speaker.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. So yes, it is, and you will have 5 minutes to address the commission, and you can proceed at any time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Dr. Amin Tais. I'm a professor at Fresno State and also a board member of the organization called Level the Playing Field Fresno. We are a 501 charity established in 2019, and we are seeking to help people around the valley, particularly in Fresno, around issues of helping their kids participate in sports, particularly soccer. What we do is basically create opportunities for scholarships for things like recreational soccer, competitive soccer, and college ID camps. And this is from a belief that a lot of people in Fresno cannot afford for their kids to have adequate opportunities to be coached, to have an opportunity to grow as soccer players in the community and beyond. And so we basically set up this organization to raise funds and help people who cannot afford to send their kids to either play in recreational settings or competitive settings, as well as college students or high school students actually who want to get scholarships and so on to participate in college ID camps so that coaches from around the country can have access to these kids. Part of what we do as well is organize a number of camps throughout the year, free soccer camps for young kids that allow them to participate in soccer and learn about it, but also learn about healthy eating, healthy habits. We have a health battered snack bar at each one of these events. These are all you can eat healthy snacks designed by a registered dietitian. Also, what we try to do is provide with opportunities for kids to have access to things like cleats for participation again in various competitions around the sports of soccer. So basically, what we would ask for here is to have an opportunity to get some funds, particularly because of the pandemic. We had hard time, getting the funds that we need to help kids to again participate and have an opportunity to grow. And we hope that this all will be taken into consideration but by the respected members of your group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tays. And we also now have Alan Mcewan on Zoom. Alan, if you could unmute yourself, you will have 5 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. As you noted, my name is Alan Mcewan, and I'd like to thank the commission very much for the opportunity to speak. I am a representative of the Fresno area pickleball group. we submitted a project proposal for pickleball improvements situated at the East Rotary Park site. And I thought maybe I would let you know a little bit what our organization is about and then talk about the project. Our organization objectives are to provide opportunities for the general public participation to participate in the sport of pickleball. And secondly, to encourage the establishment of permanent pickleball courts in the Fresno city locations. We have had the opportunity to work with the Fresno Park staff over the last few years, and we're very thankful that we've been able to situate striping at 3 of the park sites for our members. What's happened in recent years is a major explosion in the pickleball arena. The sport of pickleball is the highest growing sport in the country at this point in time. And of course, that is also happening here in Fresno. And we have generated about a 600% increase since 2015, and that's an increase in participation at this point. Thought maybe I'd give a couple of words about what is pickleball, so you've got a little bit of feel for what it is. It's a game that plays with a pickleball that is about, a paddle that is about twice the size of a ping pong paddle and a wiffle ball. However, these are required specifications from the U.S. Pickleball Association, so there's some control over what is happening at this point in time. The game is played on a court that is 44 feet long and 20 feet wide. It's about a half of a tennis court. And it's played with a net about the same height at this point in time. This sport, as I mentioned, has been happening. We have made improvements. Now we're ready to move on to the next step of improvements, and that's permanent pickleball courts. Currently, there are no permanent pickleball courts in the Fresno city area. Currently, our organization brings equipment, netting systems out for people to use to play, and then we have to take it down, and it's not available for the general public at other times other than when we have scheduled activities going on within ourselves. So the growth rate has been so significant that we are endeavoring on asking for a project to make the necessary improvements to double the size of the number of courts at East Rotary Park and make those permanent courts so that they are available to the citizenry at any time that the park is open, rather than having to be controlled by when we happen to have equipment available at this time. So that's a major endeavor to try to help us meet the demand at this point. And the intent here is to, with those permanent pickleball courts, to go from 8 courts we have the existing site to, from 4 courts to 8 courts with permanent nets, as I mentioned, available to anybody anytime that the park is open. We put in a project proposal back in August of last year, and we are hoping to have your strong consideration of the necessary improvements to accomplish that as the first phase of improvements toward providing pickleball to our citizenry here. The elements that we're going to be building at that site amount to, as I said, the permanent courts with necessary net systems for 8 courts on site, would be restriping and resurfacing as necessary.
And we are at
there
5
are
minutes.
gates on site that currently don't meet ADA standards. We will fix those gates. We will place new fencing between the courts at the same time. And then there is a slope and a walkway that we were proposing to also meet ADA standards on site.
Thank you.
So
We have hit our 5-minute mark, just to let the chair know.
Okay.
Can you please start wrapping up, please?
Yes. I just wanted to mention that on my proposal, I've identified several of the Measure P section that this project would be addressing. But I would strongly like to emphasize the amount of growth that's taking place, the high need for this type of a project, and ask for your strong consideration for funding at the earliest possible date, because we now have activities going on every day of the week, and we need more. So more courts. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And we do have a member of the public in the council chamber, Mr. John Minkler.
Hello, can you hear me? This is John Minkler. I'm the co-founder of the Civic Education Center in Fresno. Our mission is to increase civility in America by guiding students to apply civic values to community service projects. We've been doing this for over 20 years. Last June, we contracted with the City of Fresno Parks and Recreation to take 120 students to Camp Fresno and had a wonderful experience there. Among the ideas that the students came up with to improve our city, one was to create jobs for teenagers, and the other was to include youth programs at community centers in Fresno that include leadership development, dialogues on current issues, and civic service projects. And just as I want to give a couple examples. What do I mean by civic service projects? One example was at Tehipity Middle School. About 10 years ago, there was a traffic incident where a student was slightly injured, and the students they had a civic education group that we worked with. They wanted to have a stoplight put up at Belmont right in front of the school. And so we talked about who puts stoplights in, and we contacted the city. The city sent someone out, and they looked at the intersection and said, this doesn't qualify for a stoplight, and the kids were disappointed. But the person from the city saw that there was a divider with shrubs that were high enough that drivers couldn't see students crossing the street. So the person from the city arranged for a landscaping crew to come out and cut the shrubs so that the drivers could see that students were starting to cross the street, and the students felt like they had accomplished something. These are middle school students that felt like they were making a difference, making it safer for themselves and their peers. Another example, at Toronas Middle School, there were lots of incidents of fighting and bullying, and so we guided the students to come up with a program where they instituted conflict resolution, and we brought in an artist who created a mural on the playground that they now use. It's called the Peace Bridge Mural. It's actually being dedicated this Thursday at Tehipity Middle School at noon, if any of you would like to come and see. Murals are a great civic service project. At Baird Middle School, there was a project on mental health where students were very concerned about other students who were depressed, and they created a program that they presented to younger students. At Gaston Middle School, we started a project that we couldn't complete because of COVID, but the idea was to have students research and develop a video about Bud Gaston, because people don't know, even people at the school itself don't know who he was, and he has an amazing story. So one example of civic service project is to honor elders like Bud Gaston who've made a real contribution to the community. So I think most of us will agree that there's an urgent need in our country right now for civic values and community service among young people. But the schools are overwhelmed. It's very challenging to go to the schools and encourage them to do more of this because COVID and all the rest of the pressures on schools. So this idea is to bring that opportunity into community centers. And our proposal is to request $200,000 to plan and implement 3 civic service clubs at 3 community centers in Fresno during the next school year. We would work with staff to identify which community centers would be most appropriate and how to proceed with this. But we would create 16 teen jobs, high school students at 2 high school students at each center that would be organizing the meetings and organizing the projects. Is my time up? Not, oh, great. So we feel like this is a new partnership between the city and the schools where the city can provide opportunities for young people to meet together, to talk about what's going on in their community, what do they care about, what needs to be done, and then to do the research and come up with a project that's really going to contribute to their community.
And we are at our 5 minutes, Chair McCoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on this item? If so, please raise your digital hand. The council chamber has no more participants raising their hands, and our Zoom appears to have no more hands.
Okay, we will move on to the next item. ID number 22-90, actions pertaining to hearing adoption of the Parks, Recreation and Arts Commission Parks Prioritization strategy that would inform the FY23 budget recommendations to City Council for existing parks, new parks, park amenities. Would WRT please begin the presentation?
We certainly can. Greetings, Commission. This is John Gibbs from WRT. I'm joined by my colleague Peter Winch, who's going to be speaking shortly, and Hannah Goldov, who's been working very hard on preparing a lot of materials for you. Happiest New Year to you all. We're going to get right into it and start getting to work. What we're presenting tonight is a discussion item. Over the last month or so, we have been talking to you, but also just thinking a little bit ahead in terms of how can we develop a good framework and a good process for the commission to give its recommendations to council and to staff towards improvements to existing parks, as well as a process for locating new parks. And we're going to be doing this, starting this tonight and over the next couple of meetings, actually a total of 3 meetings. We should land with a more formal recommendation from the commission over to council. So on the agenda tonight is just the usual recap of Measure P for anybody who's joining us and is unfamiliar with Measure P. We just want to clarify that. We're going to talk through, and Peter in particular is going to jump in and speak more specifically around a process for prioritizing existing parks. It's going to be a little familiar from our highest need work in terms of giving some good rigor, a bit of an analytical process. It's not just our favorite park, but that there's some actual criteria that go into this. Peter's going to talk about that, as well as new parks and some slightly different criteria that start to, we think could really help us target certain areas of the city where new parks are particularly relevant. And then we have a bit of a parallel process. So not thinking about a specific park and a specific priority, but instead to think about a recreation priority. Is it a pool? Is it a picnic area? Is it a facade renovation? And to develop a bit of a system around those types of amenities that could be applied certainly to priority parks, but also really to any park. And this should all be somewhat familiar because we presented this in December. So with that, I'm going to take it away and get right into just a quick Measure P recap. And then Peter's going to continue on, and I'll pick it back up at the close. So just a quick recap of Measure P. Voters in the city of Fresno passed this measure. It establishes a 3/8 sales tax specifically to be used for these 5 buckets: improving and maintaining existing parks, establishing new parks with some emphasis on senior and youth recreation facilities. It's also about job training for youth and for veterans through recreational programs. That's the 3rd bucket. The 4th being expanded access to arts and culture, and the 5th being trail, street beautification, efforts around the San Joaquin River Parkways. These 5 buckets. Tonight, we're primarily focusing on buckets 1 and buckets 2, existing parks and new parks. So Measure P creates some significant potential funding, again, based on sales tax revenue incurred per year, estimated at potentially $38 million and broken out into these buckets. I'll focus in primarily on the orange and red colored buckets here in this pie chart that's been kind of graphically laid out here on the slide. 46% on the far right side, 46% of the Measure P funding going towards improving and maintaining existing parks. Previously, we had talked a lot about highest needs, but tonight we're really just higher level, 46% going towards existing parks. And then at the bottom of the graphic here on the screen, 21.5% towards new parks. And again, half of that has a highest need neighborhoods designation, which we all wrestled down at the end of 2021. So that's a quick summary there. So let's now take, Peter was going to take it away and is going to talk about that prioritization framework that we're excited to discuss with you tonight.
Thanks, John and staff, and thanks, Commission, for having us back. This material will be a little familiar from December, but a lot's happened in between. We've had a whole holiday season and it's a new year. So dust off the cobwebs, but I'll try to get through this a little bit quickly. What we're aiming to get tonight is a good dialogue with you that allows you commissioners to have sort of look under the hood and help us recommend to staff how to prioritize parks, both existing parks and new parks, these 2 buckets that John said we're emphasizing. So we're recommending a process here, and we're aiming for the Commission to weigh in on that process and to essentially make its recommendation. Then we'll be coming back and sharing with the Commission how that process would result in specific parks being prioritized. So how do we prioritize parks? What we're recommending is that we pull from the Parks Master Plan, which was adopted in 2018, and those are the circles here that are in blue. That we also recognize that the city of Fresno has made strides towards certain projects already, that those green projects also need to be acknowledged. And then finally, that the community is having an opportunity now to have fresh input into what parks we should prioritize. And primarily we're getting that input through the online survey, which is available now and has something like 300 responses to date. This information then needs to have a second step, which is, okay, now we've identified those parks, what should we do there? What improvements need to be made at those parks? That really is sort of a second step, and we'll get there together. But again, there are important inputs that we need to keep in mind as we define what those park improvement projects will be, and that includes understanding that we gained through the Parks Master Plan process, which after all was relatively recent, 2018. Also, the pipeline projects that I referred to before are defined as well. They include specific recommendations for each of those parks. The community recreation priorities that we're getting through the survey. And finally, we're intending to do some targeted specific outreach in neighborhoods around a subset of these prioritized parks. So high level, the Fresno park system has approximately 80 park sites. And you can see here how they're distributed around the city. The first of the criteria that we recommend including in our prioritization of existing parks is what is the condition of parks? And so we're suggesting that parks that are in poor condition should be recognized and included and given value in a prioritization process. And those parks are showing up in red on this map. The second criteria we are identifying, and again, this is coming from the Parks Master Plan, is parks that don't currently have a neighborhood amenity. So there are some parks that they're there, but they may not be serving the community as well as they could be because they don't have a full range of recreation features that you would expect at a neighborhood park. And those parks are showing up on this map as white dots with red circles around them. The third category or criterion that we're pulling from the Parks Master Plan is what we're calling community priority parks. And these are parks that people who participated in that planning process, both at a series of a stakeholder workshop and at a series of workshops that were held in each of the city's council districts. Back then we were doing in-person workshops with tables and boards and markers and that whole thing. And these are the parks that came out of that process, the parks that you see circled and numbered on this map. Then we've got our flagship parks. This also came out of the Parks Master Plan. And the idea with these was to think about if we only had limited dollars, and back then there were more limited dollars because we didn't have Measure P yet, where would we choose to spend that money? And these flagship parks were intended to distribute park improvements so that each part of the city really did have some really good parks that we called flagship parks.
3 per council district in particular.
Thank you. And then another category from the Parks Master Plan is access gaps. We mapped areas of the city that had poor access to parks. And those are shown on this map in pink and red. Basically anything that's not green is currently outside of easy walking distance of a park. But we also wanted to identify here existing parks that are close to access gaps. In other words, if there's an area of the city that's not well served by parks, then maybe we should focus resources on the parks that are closest to that area to bolster them and make them work better for a larger population. Okay, then we're moving on to a new source of criteria, and that is the city's pipeline projects. Those are depicted here as blue circles with numbers in them. And these are projects that the city has already defined and allocated funding for through Measure P. So the idea is that these projects are acknowledged, recognized, they already have a public process behind them, and they need to get points. And then finally, through this process, we want community members now to have a voice and to have the priorities of today be recognized. We heard a little bit of that today in the public input part of this meeting. And this survey, the online survey, really needs to be, we need to spread the word to make sure that people are aware of it. People who care about park improvements have an opportunity to make their voice heard. We have, how many did I say? 388 or about 394, I think, responses to the survey so far. And right now you can sort of see not everyone responded to this question of name 3 parks that you feel are most in need of upgrades. But I think this captures the first 230 or so responses. The number has grown since then. So you can see which parks are beginning to emerge as the high priorities for the community. Again, this is not final, this is in process. So that's why we presented it as a word cloud and not data, but just to give you a picture of how those community priorities can start to get factored in. So what we're moving toward and what we've already created really, but without inputting all of the information, is a table that allows us to put all the parks here in rows and assign them points based on each of these factors that we've walked through tonight. Prior to taking into account the emerging priorities, you can see the parks that are rising to the top of the list based on the other categories. And the caveat here is if we were to assign each of these criteria the same value. These are the ones that would right now rise to the top of the list. But what we would like to do this evening is, first of all, get input from the commission on these categories, but also, and maybe actually we'll start with this and then kind of go back to a bigger picture discussion, but get your input on which of these categories are most important, so that we can sort of be more sensitive and really make sure that the things that are most important to you are the things that you can use in your process to make recommendations to staff. And when I say you, I'm speaking to the commission. And so we're going to give you a chance to vote. There's going to be a series of polling questions that are going to pop up. So hopefully this doesn't just continue our challenging Zoom call so far. So we'll hope that this works. But we have a polling question for each of these criteria, and we're going to ask commissioners to vote on whether they think that criterion should be considered higher than average, equal to, or less than average compared to the other criteria. And maybe I'll pause here in case there are any questions or clarifications.
Peter, this is Commissioner Parks, and I'm here in the chamber, so I don't have the ability to fill out the poll. Is it possible to submit it like by email later on, as we did with the highest needs assessment poll questions?
I think you were cutting out a little bit, Commissioner Parks, but as before, I think we'll simply have to have a process where we'll bring in your vote post facto if we can't get it on the screen right now.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Peter, can you just remind me some definitions of terms? Access gap?
Yeah. Access gap are areas of the city that are beyond a half-mile walking distance from a park. And we actually calculated that based on a GIS tool called Network Analyst, which uses the street network.
Sometimes we refer to them as park deserts.
Right. So, but park adjacent to an access gap wouldn't change the fact that that access gap still remains. I mean, still, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
For example, a new park in the next thing we're going to be talking about would certainly also be solving for an access gap. In this case, we're suggesting that, well, in the meantime, it does take a while sometimes to get a new park, or there just may not be land for whatever reason. This might chip away at that park desert.
Understood. Thank you.
I have a similar question in terms of definition. Neighborhood amenity. Could you remind me of that?
Yeah, so during the Parks Master Plan, we found a number of parks that were missing neighborhood amenities, which is what we refer to as a picnic area, a tot lot, a small playground. Just some of those kinds of basic things really didn't exist. And sometimes they didn't exist because they were either in such poor shape or just so minimized, or sometimes they just didn't exist at all. And I think we felt that through the Parks Master Plan, it was really felt that those parks should have those kinds of amenities, to serve a local neighborhood, regardless of the disposition of the rest of the amenities in that park.
Do all of our almost 80 parks have restrooms?
No, and there are standards that Fresno uses and many cities use associated with which types of parks have restrooms. I'm not remembering off the top of my head now what exactly our standard is, but it might not be I think there is not a standard that says there are restrooms in every park. But that's something staff could speak a little bit more about if we would like.
Is that considered a neighborhood amenity?
Yeah, typically, and staff, you guys are going to have to help me out because I honestly don't remember. But typically, a neighborhood park in most cities, a neighborhood park doesn't provide a restroom. Because the assumption is that people are walking
are close enough.
And heavily debated in many cities and jurisdictions, but Dr. Apuda gets points for having raised her hand and for the discussion.
Okay, so seeing no other hands raised, why don't we go ahead and do the poll? Hannah, if you can initiate it and start us off with the first question.
Yes, I will initiate the poll. It's going to look very similar to the previous poll you took on October 25th, and I will read it out. Is everyone seeing it on their screen? Not yet?
No.
Great. So after reviewing each park prioritization criteria, how should park condition be weighted? Higher than, equal to, or less than average?
It's nice. All of the questions that we're going to be going through are on the screen, so we can kind of keep track of things. You can move that dialog box around on your screen as well, just to make sure you can see the full list and know where you are.
And again, I won't vote, staff won't vote, members of the public won't vote. This really is just for the commission and your discussion.
Great. So here, sorry. I will end the poll now. And share the results. $11 out of 12 higher than, and 1 equal to. Okay. Now moving to the next question.
How should parks without a neighborhood amenity be weighted?
Thank you. Wasn't seeing it yet. So this is after reviewing each prioritization criteria, how should parks without neighborhood amenity be weighted? We have 6 respondents so far. Is there anyone else that's still needing to respond?
Hannah, I think this is Commissioner Parks in the chamber. I think we only have 6 commissioners that have the ability to fill out the poll right now, because we have 2 missing or not present tonight, and then myself.
Okay. We had, okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our results, mostly higher than. Moving to the third, after reviewing each criteria, how should community priority parks be weighted?
And again, these were the parks that were prioritized by community members who participated in the Parks Master Plan process.
Great, thank you. And we're more split here. 3 higher than, 2 equal to, 1 less than. The next question, after reviewing each criteria, how should flagship parks be weighted? So those parks identified in the Parks Master Plan. There were 3 in each council district. Great. Here, most of you chose equal to. Next up, how should parks adjacent to an access gap be weighted? And you all chose equal to, and 1 chose less than. Great. Next up, how should parks with a pipeline project be weighted? Great. 3 higher than, 1 equal to, and 2 less than. And lastly, how should parks with emerging priorities be weighted? So these are parks identified in the survey that is currently being filled out by around 390 participants so far. Great. Now we have 3 chose higher than, 1 equal to, and 2 less than. And that is the whole survey. Thank you all so much for participating.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And those results all have an asterisk. We will get Commissioner Parks's votes and add those in. And when we come back to you, we'll show you the results. And then I think we'll talk through the stages I think at the end of this presentation. But I think what we're looking for you now is this weighting. And if there's some discussion to be had, we could break for discussion now and talk about this category, or we could move right into the next one and keep going and hold our discussion for the end. I would defer to the chair on that.
I'm sorry, my sound cut out a little bit. Peter, can you repeat it again?
Of course. We could break for discussion now, and commissioners could have a chance to discuss the existing parks prioritization framework, or we could move on to the next category, which is new parks, and then the final category, which is recreation priorities, and have our discussion all together at the end.
Dr. Oputa has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, John, what did you say?
Dr. Oputa has her hand raised.
Okay. Before we get to Dr. Oputa's question, I think we should have a discussion after each presentation so it wouldn't be so jammed up.
Okay.
Okay, Dr. Oputa.
Thank you. I'm wondering, since we will be taking Commissioner Parks' responses. Would it be appropriate and is it possible to get the responses from commissioners that are not present? My first being, would it be appropriate and is it possible?
Commissioner Puda, this is Brianna with the City Clerk's Office. We'll be more than happy to send those questions to Commissioner Parks, Barraza, and Vane later this evening.
Oh, Brianna, I think though her question is that the commission is going to take action tonight. And so in order to have the input of Commissioner Parks, I'm wondering if staff that's at City Hall would be able to print that sheet for her, and then she could put the input on that and it could be expressed that way. Or she can verbally express it, that's another option. But because the commission has to take action tonight, we can definitely send the questions to the other commissioners, but in terms of getting their participation, that would not happen tonight.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'll do.
Commissioner Miller.
My comment on that piece of the exercise is that I hope it came out as a strong priority that we need to take care of the condition of our current parks. That's the most common comment that I've gotten through this process, is that some of our existing parks, the major parks, Roding Park, really just has some really major maintenance related items that I think were really part of the promise of Measure P and some of the lowest hanging fruit. And anyway, I believe that exercise that we just went through sort of highlighted that. And that's my only comment.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dolan.
I just wanted, I apologize, this is probably sounds obvious, and I'm certain it is, but I just want to emphasize that when we are doing these weighting exercises like this, it's important that we each challenge ourselves. If you just say everything is higher than average, if you weight every single choice higher than average, clearly you're not really distinguishing priorities. So it's really a challenge, because I don't think any of us believe that any issue with parks is really less than average. But in this exercise, I think it's very important to sort your choices accordingly.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from any of our other commissioners?
Chair McCoy, Commissioner Parks, a quick question. Could we get some clarification on what the action is that we're taking tonight? I had a similar question to Dr. Oputa regarding if we could collect Commissioner Vang and Commissioner Barraza's responses, because I think their input is really important. So I just wanted to better understand what the action is that we're taking tonight.
Yep, so I'll take a stab at that and then Peter can weigh in. In terms of the action that you're going to take tonight, so let me go high picture and then we'll take a step back. So as you all know, you're going to need to make recommendations as a commission in February related to the fiscal year 2023 budget as it relates to general fund and Measure P money. So in order to make those recommendations, WRT has worked hard to with staff to come up with this framework for how you will make those recommendations. The action that we're asking you to take tonight is adopting this framework. So similar to the exercise that you all did with highest needs neighborhoods, this is very similar to that. So how you want to weight things and then essentially adopting that framework so that we can apply that to Fresno park systems and projects so that you all will be able to come to recommendations by February. In terms of the second part of your question about the other commissioners not being here, I can't speak to the attendance of that. I didn't receive any information or email as to why they are not here. But I would really encourage those of you that did attend tonight, to voice your opinions and to really move this forward, because we're going to run into the same time crunch that we did with highest needs.
Thank you, Aldi. And I happen to have printed the questions just for my own review, so I'll hand them over to the city clerk here in the chambers.
Great, thank you. And I think your input can also be included during the discussion as you all work your way towards a recommendation to adopt. I think it will take also verbal input from each of you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dolan, do you have any other questions? Your hand is up. Thank you.
I had a question about the emerging priority park. What survey is that taken from, or is that survey still open?
Yes, we have an online survey currently up on the city's website, and there's been some promotion done in a number of different channels. We may be able to, staff may be able to provide some more current updates. We have 388 or 394 actually responses so far. In order to be able to take the survey responses into account before the commission is expected to vote on actual park priorities, so that we actually have a chance to sort of crunch the numbers, we're going to need to basically pause the survey or put a line and put a marker in the survey, I think on January 20th, to give us enough time to turn around the results so that we can present them back to you on the 24th.
So this was the same survey you showed us in the previous meeting, correct?
We talked about it at a previous meeting. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, all right. It closes on the 20th, but then after that, it'll reopen later down the line, right?
I think we may just leave the survey open, but we're going to have to stop using the information from the survey in this exercise on January 20th.
Correct. So anything that's received after that date just goes towards phase 2 of our outreach and really helps form the 5-year capital improvement plan. So there, as Peter mentioned, no hard deadline. The survey will not come down at the 20th, but rather kind of drawing the line in the sand and using information prior to that for this exercise and information and responses collected after the 20th of January, really to inform phase 2 of our outreach, which is related to the capital improvement plan.
Thank you. I also had a question about park adjacency to access gap. So the access gap, so it takes into account the streets that lead to a park, but does it take into account anything beyond that, like sidewalks, or is it just based off the streets?
The access gap is just primarily areas of the city that do not have parks, where a person couldn't walk there in a 10-minute walk, and that assumes streets and sidewalks as the path that people would take to get there, but that's kind of more of a technical point. Just think about an access gap as a park desert. There's no parks in that area. And an adjacent park might be one that could serve, that community that doesn't have a park.
Okay, so sorry, I don't think I'm understanding then. So are you saying that this doesn't take into account of like how accessible a park is to, in terms of like, streets leading there or sidewalks leading there?
This assumes that there are streets and sidewalks that would ostensibly take people from the desert over to the oasis. If I can.
So just to clarify, streets and sidewalks, right?
Yes, and no analysis was done to determine that in terms of us understanding an adjacency. The areas in green on the screen, which are the service areas for a particular park, that is based on a technical analysis looking at streets and sidewalks. We've assumed that there are streets and sidewalks that generally would allow people from the park desert to access an existing park.
Oh, that's a very big assumption. At least that's what I believe. So.
Yep. So it's this. Yeah. This is a general. This is a general assumption that that access exists. And if you look at the map, you can start to see that there are obvious adjacencies with these parks to the red areas.
Thank you.
Commissioner Singh, if I understand you, I think you're saying incorrectly that not every street has a sidewalk, not every street is equally walkable, and that's certainly true. But I think at the scale of the city, this was a really helpful tool to be able to define where there was reasonable park access and where there wasn't. It's not a perfect analysis. If we were to want to dive in at a very granular level, we would want sidewalk information, but that's maybe one step beyond where this analysis went.
Thank you.
Yep.
If we don't have any other questions, we can move on to the next presentation, Peter.
Chair McCoy?
Yes.
Just a question for you. Would you like to vote on the weighting at 1, 2, and 3? Because there are 3 essentially topics he's going to cover. Or would you like to vote on all 3 at the very end?
No, let's keep it separate so we can do our voting for each one separately.
Okay, so your first voting will take place now.
Okay.
And then Peter will move on to the second part of the presentation. You'll vote on that second part, and then he'll move on to the third, and you'll vote after the third.
So we'll do a roll call, correct?
You'll need a motion on the table first.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the park prioritization weighting presentation?
So, and just to clarify, and I think Hannah is on, and maybe she can revisit it for all of the commission members so you understand what you're voting on. If she could just show where all of these weighting factors ended up, and you can either vote to adopt them as a result of the poll, or you guys can debate it and change the weighting based off of, comments and questions. And because this is a hearing, you'll have to go out to for public comment prior to a vote.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I am happy to now share the results of each question. This, I will have to go one at a time. So this is A.
And we'll have to, again, put the asterisk that this doesn't include one commissioner's vote. That will be incorporated afterwards. So I think the motion might have to be adopting the framework with the full commission's aggregate recommendations, even if you don't quite know how that percentage works out.
I'm noticing here we have 12 responses instead of 6.
I think what happened is staff responded to the first question because they didn't realize they were not included. And then after you stated that staff wasn't included, that's why it dwindled down to 6.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing this one and move to the next question, B.
Before you, can I ask how we're going to handle that first question since it has non-commissioner responses? Is it possible to redo that question?
Could redo the question, or we could assume that the majority were all for higher weighting at higher than, and And
Because
so,
it was so high anyway.
so it was so high, I think that statistically it's still quite valid. If we were to remove any excess votes, it wouldn't change the outcome if we were going all
Good
in on
point.
higher than.
Can I just ask the equal to, can you tell me how many that was?
Yes, it's one person. Can you not that on the screen?
Thank you, John.
No, okay. Good to know.
That makes sense.
We
Yeah.
see yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
fair point.
Great. So yes, that was question A about park condition, and everyone except one said higher than. Okay, back to B. So this was 5 out of 7 said higher than, 1 out of 7 said equal to, and 1 out of 7 said less than for park without neighborhood amenity. Moving to C, 3 out of 6 said higher than, 2 out of 6 said equal to, and 1 out of 6 said less than.
And we're not seeing that displayed.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
So again, for community priority park, 3 out of 6 higher than, 2 out of 6 equal to, and 1 out of 6 less than. Moving to D, this is flagship parks. 1 out of 7 was higher than, 4 out of 7 was equal to, and 2 out of 7 was less than. Moving to E, this was parks adjacent to an access gap. 0 out of 6 said higher than, 5 out of 6 said equal to, and 1 out of 6 said less than. Moving to F, this is park with a pipeline project. 3 out of 6 said higher than, 1 out of 6 said equal to, and 2 out of 6 said less than. And lastly, G, this is emerging priority parks. 3 out of 6 said higher than, 1 out of 6 said equal to, and 2 out of 6 said less than.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller, you have a question?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm wondering about the, it feels like there may be some subtleties to this. For instance, the timeline, two things I noticed. There's a sort of a plurality of these questions that a significant number of us rated higher than. But there's the 2023 budget, which, I think you could make an argument based on these results that in the short term, we should be focusing on bringing our existing parks up to a basic standard. But then in 24, 25, 26, these other priorities may increase relative, once we're at a baseline, then it may make sense for the emerging priority parks to take the lead. And I don't think that, that in a way it feels sort of obvious, but I don't think that was sort of explicit in this process. I think what we're voting on, or what it seems like is that, what's the priority right now. But if we're doing a 5-year planning process, I feel like I feel like we should be able to build that subtlety in at this step, but maybe I'm missing something.
Go ahead, Aldi. I seen your hand up.
No, you're good. I was just going to help tag team the answer with WRT. But I'm happy to have them chime in as well. But this will really inform your fiscal year 2023 budget recommendations. And while it may help inform the 5-year capital improvement plan, I don't think it's sealed. It's a sealed deal and that's it. I think there are other opportunities for how that plan is going to come together, Commissioner Miller. And also, each year, the commission will have to make these recommendations. And so essentially each year you're going to have this same task in front of you. So this is just the first year you're going to be doing that. So next year, if you all feel like priority 5 over priority 1, needs to rise above, you'll have that opportunity to, change the weighting at that time.
I just don't, well, and we haven't voted yet, but I feel like that's important to mention that we're explicitly talking about a shorter term use of these funds versus long range planning then. Is that a fair comment to make?
That's a fair comment to make. So let's touch upon that a little bit more. What I mean by there's additional components that will be included in the outreach plan, in the capital improvement plan, is because phase 2 outreach is also very extensive, right? That's more boots on the ground, community meetings, etc. So in terms of what will come to form those 5-year CIP plan is a little bit different of a formula than just the prioritization weighting that we're doing tonight. And this exercise really is focusing on the fiscal year 2023 recommendations.
So now I have to go out to the public, correct?
Did we make it through all of the factors?
Yes.
Okay.
All the results from the 7 questions were displayed on the screen.
Perfect. Then yes, please take it out to the public for comment.
Okay. Would any member of the public like to make a comment regarding existing? No, this is, park prioritization weighting?
If a member of the public would like
You have 3 minutes.
If a member of the public would like to comment, please raise your digital hand. If you're a member of the public and would like to comment, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised in Zoom or in the council chambers.
Thank you. So now I have to call for a motion, correct, Christy?
That is correct.
Okay. So do I have a motion on adopting the framework for the park prioritization weighting survey that we just did? Would that be the motion, kind of like Christy?
Yeah, as presented by Hannah.
As presented by Hannah and WRT team?
I so move with the caveat that if it didn't already, it includes Commissioner Parks' votes.
Thank you, Dr. Apuda. Is that possible to do that motion like that, Christy?
Well, we wouldn't be really adopting anything then if it could change. And so we either need to get Commission Member Parks's responses included in this now, or we'll have to bring it back at the next meeting. But I don't think that allows WRT the time that they need to be able to present the information from the surveys.
I believe Hannah might have them now in an email sent at 6:45.
Yep, we received an email and we have the handwritten responses, which I could read out for benefit, but we're also being anonymous here. So
yes.
we do have record of that
Okay.
We can attest to. So Hannah has those results.
I wonder
Okay.
if you could qualitatively, if you could make a recommendation, which is adopting this as the framework for adopting these 7 criteria as the framework for prioritizing existing parks, and using the commission's weighting to weight these factors. And we don't have to, and maybe in the motion, you don't have to define what the weighting is, just that we are using the commission's weighting in that prioritization framework.
Yeah, and then the results of that weighting will be included in the minutes.
Okay. Is that fine with you, Dr. Apuda? Would you like to still motion that?
Yes, I would like to move using the Peters language.
I know it was a lot. Yes.
Without having to repeat it myself.
Okay, do I have a second?
I will second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dolan. Secretary, can you please conduct a roll call vote?
Certainly. Commissioner Parks,
Yes.
Commissioner Singh,
Yes.
Commissioner Cummings,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Apuda,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dolan,
Yes.
and Chair McCoy.
Yes.
That passes.
Thank you. All right, we will now move on to, is it existing parks prioritization? No, new park. New park, it's three of them, so they're kind of like confusing. We will now move on to new park prioritization with WRT and their team. Get ready to do the presentation, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair McCoy. I'll try to be a little bit a little faster on this one. You've seen the material, and it's very similar to the existing parks criteria, but there's fewer of them, so it's a little tighter. So two of these criteria are coming from the Parks Master Plan. Those are the circles that are in blue. One is pipeline parks, and in this case, they are pipeline park projects that would be new, that would be adding to the Fresno's park system. And then there are two other ones. One is emerging community priorities, which again is coming from the survey. And then the second we're calling other initiatives. And this is a way for us to capture projects that may have been identified or park opportunities that may have been identified in previous planning efforts. And with that, I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And again, there is a next step, which is once we have the sites identified, what do we do with them? That's a whole other ball of wax to determine what's the best program for those parks, what are the design characteristics, and so on. And even what are the specific sites? And I think what we're aiming for in this exercise is to be able to identify areas of the city that are most in need of parks. And in some cases, there are specific sites that are already been identified. But in other cases, there's still a second step, which is what are the specific sites that we can find within those priority areas? So these circles here are trying to capture some of the opportunities for potential future park sites. So in blue, we've got joint use opportunities with schools and the storm drainage basins. In green, we've got the pipeline projects. We've also, want to recognize vacant land as an opportunity, public land as a particularly maybe important opportunity. Community recreation priorities, again, there may be specific sites that community members bring forward, and then other initiatives, the park master plans, I should say the specific plans, maybe there are community initiatives as well that have identified specific sites. We want to be able to recognize all those opportunities. Okay, coming back to the criteria for identifying areas of the city that should be priorities for new parks. Number one, areas that in the Parks Master Plan are rated high in parks needs. And this was a more complicated GIS analysis. It basically is like the park deserts or park access gaps that we were talking about before, but it also is factoring in some other indicators having to do with some indicators, honestly, that maybe overlap with the highest need neighborhoods discussion. So in red here, you see parks that would be considered park priority areas.
Not parks, but areas that would be considered of greater needs. Yeah.
Exactly. Second factor is community priority areas for new parks that are coming from the Park Master Plan engagement that was done. So again, there were a bunch of workshops that were done, including a workshop with stakeholders, which is represented by this map, and a series of workshops in each of the 7 council districts, which is represented by this map. And in both cases, these are dot exercise. These are the results of basically dot exercises and community workshops.
And attendees at those meetings had seen the previous heat map that identified where our park deserts, where our gap areas in the city, and with their collective wisdom, generated these results.
Yep. Yeah, and interestingly, you can see here, even though we held workshops in all 7 districts, I think a lot of people recognize that there may be greater needs in districts other than their own, and they didn't just place dots in their own areas. And that was an important moment, I think, in that process.
Yeah, great point, Peter.
We've got pipeline projects, which are sites that are currently not parks, but the city has already looked at those and allocated funding toward their development as park or recreation sites. And then we've got projects or sites that may come from other planning initiatives. This is what I started to talk about with specific plans, as well as parks or initiatives, parks or park sites that may have come out of other processes. That might include the TCC process, where the MLK Park became a focus, and the Fresno Southeast Regional Park and Soccer Complex. And then finally, community emerging priorities for new parks. This again is coming from the survey. You can see the results of our preliminary capture of the first 230 or so responses. And what we ask people to do is identify the nearest major intersection, so that we're going to be able to come back to you and put dots on a map at those intersections, recognizing that that might not be at the exact site, but that is in the area that people want to see a new park. So if we put all of these categories together right now, without the benefit of that last category, without the benefit of either of these 2 orange categories, those are not factored in yet, but looking just at these first 3 categories, this map is trying to express where the priority areas for new parks would be based on those 3 inputs. So we're going to want to come back to you and modify this map based on adding the results of the analysis of these 2 circles. But what we'd like to ask you to do tonight is to think about and hopefully recommend or adopt a definition of a framework for establishing priority areas for new parks that will result in a map which takes into account these 5 factors. So this one is a little different. We haven't set up a series of poll questions because maybe weighting feels like it's less. I think there's enough complication already. It's a very geographic exercise. It doesn't lend itself to being put in a table. So what we'd really like the commission to think about and adopt is this framework for identifying areas of the city that are in greatest needs of new parks, so that can result in a map that identifies areas that we should look at for park sites.
Peter, I have a question. Are some of the parks that apply for the Prop 68 funding in these priority areas?
Yeah, so for example, I think parks that applied for Prop 68 funding should fall into this other initiatives basket if they didn't receive it. If they received it, that's another ball game, because maybe we don't want to prioritize them because they already got their funding. But the parks that applied and didn't receive it, we want to try to recognize that in this other initiatives basket.
Yes, so from my understanding, the awardees for the Fresno parks from the Prop 68 funding was the Milburn and Dakota Park and Council District 1, and Radio Park and Council District 7. And I think I seen the Milburn and Dakota Park on here.
Right. So that's a great point. this is a question for staff. Is the Milburn Dakota Park, does it need matching funds from the city, perhaps through Measure P, or is it fully funded by Prop 68? And that may be what should determine whether it belongs on here as a pipeline project. If it has full funding through Prop 68, maybe it should fall off this map.
So the reason there's funding in bucket 2 is because there is a gap in terms of what the grant will cover and then what costs are ineligible. So the money that was appropriated in bucket 2 in fiscal year 22 that you're seeing right here is to cover those ineligible costs.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So responding to the question, I think, or the implication of the question maybe is that park, if it already has received its funding through Prop 68, maybe it should come off of this map.
And I'm just going to throw this out there as a reminder that when it comes to Measure P, certain buckets do give priority to projects that that leverage state and federal grant funding as well.
That's true.
Thank you. Is that the end of the presentation for this one, Peter?
It is, and so we don't have a voting exercise for you on this one. It's really a matter of reflecting on this framework, these criteria that we've walked through, and coming to adopt language as a group about how you think these criteria should be used, or maybe it's as simple as, should these criteria be our framework for identifying future park sites to be funded with Measure P?
Okay. Do any commissioners have any questions in regards to this presentation?
I have a question. I'm trying to understand this map. The dark dots, are each of those a new park, or is the circle area where there needs to be a new park? Can you explain it to me?
Yeah, it's a great question. The dots are representing all of the dots that showed up on the previous maps. This map is trying to sort of blend together all of the maps in the category. The circle is trying to show a sort of a blob that generalizes where those dots were. So what we're asking the commission to do is recognize, basically adopt this framework for creating a map. And the map still needs some work because we still need to do analysis on those latter two categories that we haven't brought in yet. But the map ultimately that you will be using to prioritize new parks, if you were to adopt this framework, would be a refined version of this that would be a combination of zones or areas that are these kind of blob shapes and specific sites, because in some cases there really are specific sites. And I know that's complicated. This is a complicated one.
But I think if I understand you, in general, the blobs, as you called them, kind of indicate a cluster from the other maps, exactly, where things kind of cluster together.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Do any other commissioners have any questions for WRT before we go out to the public?
Chair McCoy, this is Commissioner Parks. I have a question regarding the emerging community priorities and the other initiatives. I understand that we don't have all of that data yet, but I was wondering if that is going to incorporate the public comment that we've been receiving at our commission meetings over the last couple of months, or is it just from the online survey?
Yeah, we're really relying on the online survey. So people need to be, we really want to encourage people who comment here to also fill out that survey. That's really important.
And a follow-up question, if folks are participating in our meetings, I think we capture email addresses. I think you have to fill that out to sign up. Have we sent the survey, has the city sent the survey information out to anyone that has attended a meeting in the past?
Yes, we have.
Awesome.
And we've additionally sent it to the folks that have asked to be added to the distribution list.
Awesome, thank you. And then one other quick question. On the map, the master plan needs gradient, could you explain, please, what the suitability analysis data is, what that means? And then follow-up question to that, in the blobs that we were just looking at, how does the needs gradient kind of affect where those blobs priority areas are?
Yeah, the needs gradient is one of the factors that we used to create those. I hate to add this to the discussion again, but those blobs. It is one of the factors. We formed them based on the shapes of particularly the red in this map, in combination with the responses that we got from the community in the Parks Master Plan process and the other factors.
Thank you, and I'll start using the appropriate term, the priority zones.
Any other commissioners have any questions for WRT before we go out to the public? All right, would any member of the public like to make a comment regarding the new park prioritization? You have up to 3 minutes.
Any members of the public that would like to comment on the new park prioritization, please raise your digital hands. Seeing none on Zoom and none in the chambers, we have no public comment on this.
Thank you. Do I have a motion on adopting the framework for creating a map for the new parks prioritization?
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dolan. I will second it. Secretary Clerk, can you do roll call?
Just real quick, I'm sorry, what is the motion? Like, what is, so I guess, are we we're voting on.
So the motion is adopting the framework that we just seen for creating a map for the new park prioritization.
And with each of these recommended areas being, I understand that weighting is difficult, but each of them being equally important to the map.
I'm sorry, I can barely understand you, Commissioner Parks. I'm
Sorry
having a
about
hard
that.
time understanding you.
I keep
hearing you. It's not understanding you, it's just hearing you.
Sorry about that, I keep going away from the microphone. Just a clarification, I just want to understand, so each of these bubbles that we're seeing that are part of the framework will be equally important or equally weighted in the prioritization?
I believe so. Can WRT comment?
That's right. We didn't make we didn't bring you a recommendation that included the weighting piece here. Of course, you could actually make a motion that does introduce a weighting piece, but I think we felt that because of the complexity of this issue, maybe weighting was one additional layer of complexity that might be hard.
But it is something that could be introduced as we're looking at like the 5-year timeline. Is that a fair statement?
I see Peter shaking his head, yes.
Sorry, I couldn't see him. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Thank
it's okay.
you. Thank you.
Hang on, I'm not clear on, I'm not clear on how we would answer that question of if this would be, I think the question was if this would be appropriate for near term versus a full 5 years.
It was something that we kind of addressed in the last piece that we were really looking at fiscal year 22, 23. And really what I'm kind of getting at is because I feel uncomfortable not knowing what the emerging community priorities and other initiatives are going to be. And, you know, when we see that information, we may want to weight that as being more important in the prioritization process. And if we have an opportunity, if we, the commission, have an opportunity to do so as we're looking at like the 5-year capital improvements plan that we mentioned in the last section, I'm just curious about that.
I think that the answer that seemed appropriate under existing parks was that this would inform the nearer term guidance in the capital improvement program, and that next year and subsequent years, this commission would kind of re-review criteria associated with additional nearer term work. So I would think that you guys could focus on the nearer term, and I don't know that it matters if it's which fiscal year, but just to think of it as more nearer term, and that this can be revisited. I also think that, as Peter's kind of talked about, this is meant to be a simpler exercise in terms of what are areas of the city that basically staff, city council can do the harder work to really identify where there are real opportunities to create parks. Because some of the previous slides showed, is it about engaging school district or the flood control district associated with basins, or is it where is there available land? So lots of complexity in terms of the actually to determine in most cases specific sites, but to instead I think what is appropriate at this point is to say that not to focus so much on the map, but to focus on these types of inputs that are going to identify places without parks, places with higher concentrations of people, so that whatever new park is going to start to serve more people, as well as certainly build on a lot of good work that's been going on, whether they're pipeline, whether it's the community feedback today, and other parks that have been talked about for a while through these other planning initiatives.
That's really helpful. Thank you both for that follow-up, and I feel more comfortable with it now. Thanks.
Commissioner Miller?
I'm sorry. I've been struggling with whether or not to admit how confusing this particular piece of the process is to me. And I think if you were to describe this to a 5-year-old, would it be fair to say that this vote that we're taking right now is approving focusing effort on the south half of the city when it comes to planning new parks? That's what I think this map of unidentified black dots located within blobs is showing me.
I think it would be, I think it would be safe to say that the areas with lots of black dots are the generalized areas where the community to date has identified more opportunities for new parks. I would say that doesn't exclude other needs in the community, and I would say that that the definition and the framework that we're providing tonight would certainly acknowledge anywhere that doesn't have a park as still being a very relevant gap in parks as identified into the needs gradient map that's on the background of this map.
But a yes vote would indicate that the process leading up to this point has identified more of a need in the southern half of the city, and that is what we are saying yes to. I think, if not, like, what is a one sentence answer to what we would be saying yes to right now? In real terms, like that these criteria, of course, these criteria would make sense, all of them, probably others, but what is the effect of a yes vote on how the process moves forward right now?
That the map generated by the inputs on the left side of the screen will capture those, capture the commission's direction for priority areas for new parks. I think that's the safest answer. What we know is that, as this map is already starting to show, that's generally in the southern part of the city, as well as areas in yellow and red on the map. I think, as Peter says, we haven't generated the map. This is kind of the map to date.
Thank you. I don't mean to be combative about it. I just feel an obligation to be able to tell the people who put me on this commission what happened at the meeting tonight. And it's,
absolutely,
it's very difficult to articulate what this particular piece of the process is doing for me.
Understood.
Higher level, we're trying to come up with a good sort of systematic, data-driven way to make good decisions about the money that's being, that Fresno voters have said, yes, let's spend it on parks. We're trying to be really serious about that and say, we're really taking all these important factors into account. It's not just on a whim, that it's a data-driven process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Howdy.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to touch upon that a little bit more. Commissioner Miller, great question. So I think that this exercise is challenging, and the content here, it is challenging. So it's okay to feel that way, and I'm glad that you expressed that, because I think it's important that you all understand that the framework that you're adopting tonight is really going to be essentially a guiding tool just for you. This isn't a recommendation to council. This isn't going anywhere beyond you all tonight. And you're going to use this tool through the next couple meetings to be able to get to a methodical way of having recommendations for the city's general fund budget and parks Measure P budget. So there's a lot of money there. And as you know, and we have a really big city. And so we wanted a way of methodically making those recommendations rather
Quizás
than...
metódicamente pueden hacer esas recomendaciones. ¿Me escucha, Luis? Okay, okay, great.
Are we able to mute the Spanish interpreter or assign him to a channel?
We have just
Yes.
muted.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So when we
Gracias.
took the highest needs,
Específicamente la necesidad más alta.
We can still hear the interpretation on our end.
No, todavía puede escuchar.
Clerk, are you able to help us?
We are muted.
Okay, ahora sí.
All right, can we?
Sorry, it's they have the ability to unmute and mute themselves
Yes.
as panelists. So every time you mute, they can unmute. I'm actually just going to remove them into the attendees, and we have another Spanish interpreter.
Thank you.
Sí, soy el intérprete español en línea, sí.
Thank you.
So we did this similar exercise with the highest needs definition when you all adopted the weighting criteria of how you're going to recommend that. And then staff was able to really explain to council the nexus of how you got to your definition. And so the thought here is that we're going to be able to use a similar nexus that you all adopted weighting criteria, so that when we take those recommendations to the council, that we're able to explain how you got there. And so this is really just a tool for essentially think of priority areas, how are we going to decide what that is? So WRT has really thought through, well, what data do we already have? And then what data do we need to collect and mesh that together to be able to come up with recommendations? And so this is really related to, new areas in Fresno for parks. So as it stands, adopting this framework would be essentially adopting it with equal weight. As Commissioner Parks alluded to, there's always the option to edit and modify if you would like. So technically you could take weighting yourselves and come up with a different formula, but the way that it is recommended here for you today is that essentially those 5 bubbles on the left of priority area and new parks would be what goes into this.
All right, so the motion still stands. So do we have any other questions before we do a roll call vote?
And we have a first with Chair Dolan, and who was the second on this?
I was, Kimberly.
Thank you.
And can we proceed with a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Commissioner Parks?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Apuda?
Yes.
Vice Chair Dolan?
Yes.
And Chair McCoy?
Yes.
Item passes.
Thank you. We will now move on to the last presentation of the night, which will be Community Recreation Priorities. Would WRT please start the presentation?
Great. I'm going to pick this one up. Greetings, everybody, one more time. So we've been talking about how to prioritize specific geographic areas, either how to prioritize an existing park or how to prioritize a new park. And that's going to give us some real targets for where improvements should be made. And let me just kind of play out that scenario. Maybe there's 5 top priority parks, existing parks, and we would go about developing, ideas for how to work on, how to renovate those parks, how to bring improvements. But this item, number 3 here, suggests a bit of a parallel process. And this one says, the improvements that we should be embarking on should really be solving for really the broader needs in the community, whatever those may be. And in fact, we're starting to gain some sense of what some of those needs are. And the Parks Master Plan has identified things. Our current survey is identifying the kinds of recreation needs out there. And you all may have some ideas about that. And so what we're recommending is that the commission could consider some of these themes or some of these kind of amenity types of amenities that are important to the park system, and to give a recommendation to staff to begin to consider those things in order to guide the improvements. And maybe here's an example of what I mean. So there may be the feeling out there that pools or a dog park, for example, might be some really important amenities that need to be considered citywide. But for whatever reason, that's really not appropriate in any of the top 5 parks that ultimately show up in our park priority list. So we might not have a good match between the parks and perhaps some of those amenities that are needed. Another example of what I'm talking about here, I'm trying to pre-answer a lot of questions and trying to make this pretty clear. What if we wanted to solve for a specific issue out there, like climate change and heat? Well, that might lead us to the idea of planting trees. It might lead us to the idea of shade structures over playgrounds and over picnic shelters, or maybe it's spray grounds, which would be appropriate just for summer cooling, et cetera. But again, if we were to only take the first couple of parks in our priority list, we might not really be able to solve for that on a citywide level. And so what we're talking through right now is to begin to think about it and have the commission, I think, give some guidance to staff to think about what are the issues that we need to solve for through these park improvements. And it could be that we can address a lot of these things just in the park priority list, or it may be that we need a parallel program like playground renovation program, or we need to think about spray grounds across the city. And that may align with those priority parks, or it may push us a little lower on the list of some of those priority parks, just around the nature of those kinds of programs. So we wanted to explore this topic with you and to generate a little bit of a discussion about that. This is not an action item tonight, as that I'm aware of, and Aldi or others correct me. But this is something that we can take your ideas and any comments tonight, and then come back with a more of a specific recommendation for you all to try on at our next meeting. So here, opening up a couple of these slides and just trying to kind of spur this. So we're developing these park priority projects, and we've identified, and what we're talking about right now are some of these community recreation priorities from you guys, from staff, from the survey, et cetera. And then ultimately we're beginning to apply these to future park sites. Looking back in time to the 2018 Parks Master Plan, this is from some survey results that were in the plan, and a pretty comprehensive survey that was completed at that time, identified certain youth programs, youth sports, and after-school programs as being important programs, and then some of the higher demand recreation facilities, picnic areas were actually topped. There was just a huge amount of enthusiasm around having places for families and groups and even individuals to be able to hang out in a park. Community gardens, dog parks, soccer in particular, and splash pads, spray grounds, those kinds of cooling types of places. So these potentially could be a capital improvement type of program. As an example, you could generate improvement programs in a number of parks, just fixing up picnic areas, or just working on fields, or just making sure that we have cooling facilities, misters and splash pads and things like that across the park system, just as an example. And I think then the next slide is just to bring it home a little bit. As we went out and surveyed parks across the city, and we identified, these poor condition parks, or sometimes the fair condition parks, we obviously saw a lot of need. And I think that there could be an approach where we really need to target a few parks, really renovate them, bring them up to speed. And I think there's also the potential to spread some of that work around to identify picnic areas, or the entry character of perhaps a greater number of parks. We showed some ideas earlier about low cost, high value kinds of improvements to parks, just representing a park to the community through its entry character. Other specific programs could target playgrounds, barbecues, seating, splash pad amenities, pathways, certainly for accessibility as well. So these are just some of the needs broadly across the park system, and wanted the commission to begin to think about this parallel process of thinking about amenities, these themes, needs, at-risk youth, climate change, could be about families and gathering, could be about accessibility. Well, will automatically be about accessibility, but all-inclusive types of facilities. It could be another theme. Anyway, these are just some examples of themes that, if you guys generated some feedback and some discussion tonight, if you have any energy left in you, we'll be recording some of these things and trying to come back with something that perhaps begins to articulate something that you could consider as a recommendation next time.
I would add just one thing, John, which is that we are actually getting input on the survey from the community now. So we are getting more information, more current information about what some of the community's broader citywide recreation priorities are now.
So I don't know, Peter, if I think this is maybe taking a step back from number 3, but this is just the overall schedule and kind of where things are going next. Maybe we should just go right into the discussion and then come back to this one. So I think that concludes item number 3 as a conversation.
Thank you. Vice Chair Dolan?
Yeah. So Peter, what kind of, or I'm sorry, John, what kind of input are you looking for here? I mean, I'm a little, we're looking at a suite of possible amenities, but these would vary from park to park. In some cases, picnic tables might be in great shape, but you know, barbecues are shot or whatever. What is it? How do we input on this? I guess I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so I think we're keeping it a little bit open here. I guess if I could, since you're asking me, I would say, I think you could think about it in terms of themes and in terms of what are we solving for with some of our, with improvement program. And if there's interest in thinking about it that way, I mentioned climate change, I mentioned family gathering, I mentioned welcoming presence in parks, I mentioned at-risk youth. There are these kinds of thematic approaches that could be quite appropriate, and that an improvement program could be something that that staff could really think about what that, what does that mean and where does that go? Outside of the commission, but for the commission to have thought a little bit about not just which park, but also, what else are we solving for?
Seems like one of the next steps, if I could add to that, might be for us to report back to you on what we're hearing from the community based on that survey, and whether we can put together a similar kind of matrix or set of factors by which the commission can say, yeah, these are the things that we want to take into account. Looking citywide at the park system in terms of Measure P funding. We want to take into account community priorities and recreation needs from the Parks Master Plan, and we want to take into account emerging community priorities that we're hearing now. And maybe there's another thing, which is maybe the commission wants to have its own dialogue about what these, I think that John is getting at that, about what these priorities might be.
I have a comment. If I understand what you might be looking for from us this evening, a couple of things that you said, John, really stand out to me. And one is that of climate change and the need for trees and shade and comfortable places for families to go. As a priority to think about. I also, in that same vein, in terms of families using parks, and something that John said, our vice chair said about different parks having different needs, and particularly depending on the area the park is in, right? And so those areas that are densely populated, where you have lots of people living in small spaces, and the need for parks to be a place for people to have space. And so thinking about benches and picnic areas and things like that. So those are just some of my kind of initial thoughts with what you were saying in terms of how do we identify? Those are just some thoughts that I have.
I think, Commissioner Oputa, you're getting at something what I am trying unsuccessfully to articulate. In our previous exercises, we were looking at broad categories that you could say these go across the system, these go across the processes, these go across the parks. When you're getting down into it, I don't think we can identify amenity needs, or at least I don't feel like I can, amenity needs across parks. It's a very specific exercise at each facility based on any number of criteria, both informed by that, the condition of that facility, the needs of that neighborhood, the specifics of the context. I just doesn't seem to me to be a way into talking about it in this broader statement across parks. I'm just not sure that we can identify amenity needs across parks as opposed to within parks.
I think that we can identify like necessities like tables, benches, things like that, because all parks need that. But I do agree, like getting into great detail of like different amenities across the board in all of our parks. Each park amenities will be different, but I think in general, benches, picnic tables, things like that, that we can identify now.
That same vein, if I may, Madam Chair, when we think about our parks and the entry character, as I think you said earlier, John, you all showed us at a previous meeting some potential looks. And the fact that we want all of our parks, now this could be across parks, we want all of our parks to be welcoming, that when people drive up to it, no matter where that park is, it's a welcoming look. It's a beautiful look. Something like that could be across parks, right?
I think that's right. And I think I'm not trying to lead you guys to the amenity. Is it a bench? Because I think you guys made that point. We don't know exactly what's needed in a particular park, but to think more broadly about what do benches serve? Who do benches serve? And is there a need for that kind of a service across the park system? And again, I think that the idea from this conversation is that I think we can bring something back next time, but ultimately that this is guidance to staff to begin to think about the needs that they understand across the park system, and to be able to come back with potentially improvement programs that work a larger number of parks and potentially at a lower dollar amount. I mean, ultimately it's about, do you pick 5 parks or 3 parks and put a lot of money into them? Do you pick 5 parks, put money into them, but then also be able to touch an additional 20 because you've done some other strategic kinds of renovations in order to solve for this? There's some bigger needs out there that we need to be starting to be aware of. And that's kind of what this is. That's what this is getting at.
Well, to get back to what you were saying earlier, John, I think there's broad themes that you could describe, right? Our parks should provide shade. Our parks should provide a welcoming entryway. Our parks should provide gathering space. I mean, I think you can talk broadly about themes that could then inform specifics, interventions within a facility. Mm-hmm. And that might be a more useful way to look at this, actually.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Commissioner Cummings?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to add, along the idea of themes, obviously with climate, as in respect to climate, and understanding the role of water in our community and actually across, California and the world. That concept, and if you're looking at multiple parks at the same time, understanding that the investment into the infrastructure that carries water and conservation measures, putting them in place. This is an opportunity. Measure P offers an opportunity for our community to actually invest in kind of widespread park to park, whether it's renovating old parks or building new parks, making sure that we're actually prioritizing where the water is coming from, how little water we can actually utilize to actually make things function. So I would like to offer up definitely in respect to, climate as being a sort of a theme. And along with that, of course, and I've mentioned this before, but because of the heat with climate and because of the region that we live in, the state, that it's important. I don't see the amenity of shade here, of the actual, you see trees in the background, but we don't actually see it written. So that combination of vegetation that's appropriate for the environment, water measures, priorities, and which offers our families an opportunity to be outside, to expand, the space beyond the home, and to be able to utilize the park as an amenity, because if it's too hot, we can't do things outside. So that's definitely a theme that has been mentioned, and I would definitely like to second that, is looking towards climate as warming, and the fact that we need to be able to provide water, whether it's to a pool or a splash pad or a tree, or whatever kind of vegetation, and making sure that we are creating as much of a cool environment as possible. And in addition to trees, I suppose we could look at structures that provide shade as well.
That's great. That's helpful.
If I may, the other population that came to mind as we're thinking about amenities is the reality of our homeless population, and what are the needs and how they use our parks, and what would be important for those members of our community.
Along with that, as Commissioner Puta brought that up, is obviously, and this subject has been brought up before, but the safety of our parks, security and safety. So along those lines is making sure that our families and the homeless, for that matter, everyone is safe in our parks.
Going back to the topic of water, possibly like water fountains, or I know there's the upgraded ones where you can actually fill your water bottle up. I think that would be a very nice amenity to have at many of our parks.
These are great suggestions. No wrong answers right now. This is just a bit of a brainstorm.
One thing that just came to mind for me, this is Commissioner Parks, as I'm looking at this graphic and looking at the paths, is investigating connectivity between parks. So as we're looking at our park system and across parks, looking at active transportation opportunities, so that you could bike between parks or run or walk, push a stroller, that kind of thing. So connectivity between the park system, maybe not using a car.
Do we have any other questions for WRT regarding this presentation? I have a question for Christy. So this is just an informational item. We are not taking a vote on this particular presentation tonight, correct?
That's my understanding now.
Okay.
Yeah, but you still want to take it out to the public just to keep it consistent.
Okay. I will now take this out to the public for public comment. Anyone in the public wanting to comment, you have 3 minutes.
Anyone on Zoom who would like to comment on this item, please raise your digital hand. Anyone on Zoom that would like to comment on this item, now's the time to raise your hand. We have nobody on Zoom raising their hand, and the council chamber, there is nobody raising their hand.
Okay, thank you, City Clerk. I guess it is 8 o'clock, and I will now adjourn the meeting. You guys have a good evening. It was good to see all of you guys tonight, and I will see you guys at our next meeting. Go spend time with your families and get ready for tomorrow.
Good night.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.